Hello, and welcome to Unity of Fredericksburg. My name is Janetta, and I am pleased to welcome all of you to the Unity of Fredericksburg weekly online gathering. At Unity of Fredericksburg, we are advancing the movement of spiritual awakening and transformation through unity, a positive path for spiritual living. For those of you watching on YouTube, live or later, be sure to say hi in the chat thread, like this video, and subscribe to the Unity of Fredericksburg YouTube channel. If you are able to attend live, we encourage you to join us at the Zoom community room for the full Sunday morning experience, including music, prayer, and connection. Send an email to info@uofva.org to receive the Zoom link. And for everyone local to Central Virginia, Unity of Fredericksburg offers a variety of fun and enriching in-person gatherings every month. Subscribe to our newsletter, our weekly newsletter at uofva.org for all the details. Our message today comes from our minister, Reverend Cheryl Fair. And now here's Reverend Cheryl.
Thank you, Johnetta, and hello, everyone. Whether you're watching right now or sometime later, we appreciate you and appreciate the energy that you bring to this ministry, Unity of Fredericksburg. So this year, 2023, one of our threads of focus for Unity of Fredericksburg is the foundations of unity. What is unity all about? And here in August, our focus is on Unity's approach to metaphysical Bible interpretation. In Unity, we don't always talk about the Bible, but for people that find the Bible to be valuable and speak to them, we have a way of approaching it. And that's what we're talking about this year by looking at this month, by looking at some stories in the Bible. Let me give you a quick overview of how Unity approaches the Bible. We see the Bible as the story of the evolution of human consciousness, and in turn, the evolution of our own individual consciousness, so that whenever you tune into something in the Bible, whatever it has to say to you in this moment, in your life, in your consciousness, that's what it's about. Unity does not provide any kind of authority in interpreting and saying this is what it's about, but we may offer you some suggestions, some ways of looking at it so that you can expand your insight with the Bible. We do have approach it usually with some steps around history and archaeology, language and literature, and then we really dive in with metaphysical interpretation. So we're going to do that today with a fairly well-known story from the New Testament, the parable of the prodigal son and his brother. And this shows up in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 15. So let's just review it. A lot of us have a vague, remembrance of what that's all about, but the parable begins with a man who has two sons, and the younger son asks to be given his inheritance. And the father says, okay, divides his wealth between his two sons, and the younger son takes his inheritance and goes out into the world and does what a lot of us do as young people. He overdoes. He indulges in extravagant living. He ends up in debt. He has to sell all the wonderful things he's bought by spending all his money to pay his debts, and ends up working tending pigs, which for people in the era of when Jesus was telling this parable, this would have been a job that was really repulsive. Nobody wants to do that job, tending pigs. So the younger son realizes, hey, these pigs have a better life than I do. They're getting fed regularly. They have a place to live. I don't have these things. And he finally kind of gets over himself and decides to go home and ask his father's forgiveness. And as soon as the father sees him coming, he just rushes to him, forgives him immediately, welcomes him back home. And that is the prodigal son. Now, we're going to come back to the end part of the story later, but let's kind of go with it for now. As I mentioned, we like to start by sort of looking at the history, if there's any archaeology to say, oh, this is something that really happened. So there's no historical basis for the parable itself. However, when it comes to Jesus and his teachings, we do know that Jesus was an actual person who lived, and there's plenty of archaeological evidence to mark the fact that he lived and taught. And there's also sort of a history within the Bible itself, in the gospel, that is of interest and interesting to point out. So when Jesus teaches this particular parable, he's speaking to a group of Pharisees, scribes, who are complaining that Jesus goes around and welcomes and eats with sinners. So he's speaking to people that are in the Jewish religious establishment at the time. And he's actually telling a series of stories to try to get them to wake up around some things. This is the third of a series of 3 stories. So we know that at the time, as it's documented, Jesus definitely had an agenda that he was trying to open up some space with these religious leaders. But that's not really relevant to how the story resonates for us. And this isn't a talk about, the history of the, relationships back then. So we're just going to move on from that and just want to acknowledge that there's no doubt that Jesus was a man who lived and taught, and that his teachings continue to resonate with so many of us. So the next way that we like to look and approach things is from a perspective of literature and language. So let's start with language. A lot of times I like to start with something simple. This word prodigal is not a word that's commonly used. As I was looking it up, I saw one of those charts that tracks word usage. So 200 years ago, the word prodigal was much more frequently used than it is now. But the basic definition that I have found is prodigal means spending or giving money or resources freely and recklessly, wastefully extravagant. And a prodigal is also described as a person who leaves home and behaves recklessly, but later makes a repentant return. So when it comes to the value of this story as literature, it's a fairly easy story for us to understand on the surface level. Even just a surface reading of it, we get a sense of, because we all have been young people and have kind of, gone out, done some foolish things, come back, gotten our act together. We understand the nature of this. So it has relevance today. We know that the ancient Hebrews, and who wrote the entire Bible, wrote in the form of metaphor and storytelling. And this, of course, was a common model for Jesus to, rather than list out points that he wanted to make, to tell a story. So that we can get engaged. But we also know that we're not meant to be taking this literally. We are not literally talking about a man and his 2 sons. And in Unity, we like to go to the metaphysical meaning beyond the physical. So beyond this notion of a man and his 2 sons and all of these things that are talked about, we want to go deeper than that. What does this mean? And in Unity, we have an approach for studying metaphysically that's based on teachings of Unity founder Charles Fillmore. And I just want to share with you, before I get into the metaphysics of this story, some resources that I use and are available to you anytime you want to dive into metaphysical interpretation. Is you can find the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary and the Revealing Word, which are both compilations of Charles Fillmore's work. You can find them online at an online ministry called truthunity.net. So they're online and searchable, so you can look up a word, click on it, learn all about it. Another resource that is one of these big heavy books, and I'm going to show you a big heavy book that came out this year, also from truthunity.net. Trying to turn it so it's not all glare so you can see it. This is the Fillmore Study Bible. And this came out this year from truthunity.net, which is headed by a minister named Reverend Mark Hicks. And so this is the New Testament with everything in the New Testament, all metaphysically interpreted by a team of ministers. So a wonderful resource that I will be quoting a couple times here this morning. And the other one that I've used is there are a series of new versions of the gospel, metaphysical versions from Reverend Bill Holton. And again, I'm trying to sort of make it so it's not, so this is the Gospel of Luke. And you can find this on Amazon. If you search Reverend Dr. Bill Holton, and that's Bill with one L, Bill Holton, and you can find each one of the Gospels. So I just wanted to share my goodies with you before I get going here. All right, so one of the handles for Unity's metaphysical Bible interpretation is that everything that we read about in these stories, we see it as activity happening in consciousness. So we're not literally talking about a man and his two sons. We're talking about the energy of our thoughts, feelings, beliefs, and attitudes as represented by these characters. So rather than literal people, we're talking about thoughts and feelings. And when we talk about, in general, when we talk about a man, we're talking about thoughts. So this parable opens with this statement: a certain man had two sons. So a metaphysical restating of that would be a certain person, and in this case, my friends, it's you, it's me, has two ways of thinking. A certain person has two ways of thinking. Sound like how life is in your consciousness? I think very often that is the case for all of us. So from the Fillmore Bible, I won't pick up my big book again. I've got it here in my notes. So from the Fillmore Bible, it says the two sons are soul consciousness and sense consciousness. So soul consciousness being all of the thoughts that are aligned with spirit, and sense consciousness, all the thoughts that are aligned with the outer material world. And from our friend, Reverend Dr. Bill Holton, his interpretation says, despite the presence of the Christ within us, that's that main central idea, the unenlightened us still tends to believe in duality, those two sons. So very often you'll hear me talk about our divine nature and our human nature. And this is kind of how we experience it, but there's a fallacy there because it is all oneness. It's just that we have this capacity in our consciousness to either focus our attention on our divine nature, which is the absolute truth of who and what we are, or our human nature, which is what our eyes, ears, our brain, our ego tells us is real in the material world. So we have this sense of duality, which is actually not true, because in actuality, what is absolute truth is our divine nature. But we're talking about how we experience this as humans. And this is kind of what we're here to do, is to experience this and figure this out and keep reminding us and remembering our divine nature, even as we go through our human lives. So take a moment right now. I've been talking and talking. Just take a breath. Just take a breath and reflect on the patterns and concerns of your own mind these days. Do you have time when you intentionally connect with the energy that you may call God within you? This is one focus, one of these two sons in this story? And are there also times when you allow concerns from your outer world to capture your attention? Or there are times in our human lives where we just have to take care of things, right? And we might not be spending as much time in prayer, in meditation, in reflection, because we've got to take care of whatever's next, right? This is sort of the other son, these two sons from this story. Are there times when you give an outer focus in your life too much of your attention? Get into worry and fretting and repetitive cyclical thinking about things. Sometimes these can be things in our personal lives. Sometimes we can get ourselves involved in things in the outer world, in our thoughts that we might come across in the news. If you have an unfortunate habit of watching the news, then you might start getting worried and fretting about the climate, the economy, stories you're hearing about health concerns or politics, right? You can get involved with these things. So whatever it is, this story about these two sons is about me and about you and about everyone, about this kind of toggling back and forth that we do in our divine nature, with our thoughts, our feelings, our beliefs, our attitudes being aligned with truth, faith, strength, power, all of these things, and our human nature, where our brains want to manage this outer life, tell us that it's real. Our ego believes in these outer realities, and it's natural for us to get involved in that because this is the evidence that we see of the outer world. So don't be too hard on yourself. It's just that this story is a reminder. Following the example from this parable, our human nature can become prodigal. All right. Let me refresh our memories on that definition. Spending or giving money or resources. And let's be clear, our energy and our attention is a resource. So giving or spending it freely and recklessly, wastefully extravagant. So this could happen in the form of some kind of physical consumption. So it could be too much intake of food or some other substance, or too much time on the computer, on the phone, watching things, too much time, sleep, too much, whatever, too much. It's all about kind of going overboard. And when we go overboard, we tend to get blind to our divine nature. We're so worried about politics that we forget our source. We forget that we are unlimited love in all circumstance. We forget that God is expressing as us and that we are always connected, always present, always powerful. We forget that because we're worried about climate change or COVID or whatever. So you might remember a time in particular when you got off track, made some mistakes, and finally things got so bad that you had to bring yourself back home. Get your prodigal thinking in order and come back home and remember your source. Now, here's the thing. As soon as, just like the younger son in the story, as soon as you make that choice to pivot your attention, in spirit, there's no process that needs to happen at that point. There's no delay. You don't have to prove yourself in spirit. You are worthy. You are whole. No matter how off the rails you went in your human life, as soon as you realign yourself with your understanding of source, you're there. You're complete. Now, we do know in our human lives, we may need to make amends. We may need to put things right. We may need to get things in order. And our understanding of spirit helps support us as we do that. But in spirit, all it takes is that pivot, of attention. And just like in the story where the father just immediately welcomed the son back home, no questions, no where have you been? What are you wearing? You smell bad. None of that, just welcomed back home immediately into the celebration and glory of being an expression of that joyful energy that we know as God. So just take a moment. Again, kind of take a breath. Breathe into this energy of acceptance and wholeness and welcome and celebration. This story is about you, and it's about you coming home in spirit and forgiving yourself and others and starting over again. But before we finish up, I have a lot to say today. I'm watching the clock. So before we finish up, there is another part to this story. The story is called The Parable of the Prodigal Son and His Brother. So let me kind of summarize the other part. After the prodigal son decides to come back home, the father instantly welcomes him. Here's the other son. The other son showing up. The other son has been working out in the field, hears about this big party, and has to come back and complain. I've been working all day long. You never threw me a party. Isn't it? I find it delightful that Jesus inserts these characters into these stories, because can't you just hear that person in your life showing up? Well, this isn't fair, because when your mind is in your outer thinking, then we compare and contrast. Well, he has more than me. Well, you spent more time on that. This is not fair. None of that matters in spirit, but here's Jesus showing that this is going to show up. This will show up in your life. So how do we look at this metaphysically and in our understanding? So I'd ask you to take a breath again and reflect on a few questions. So have you ever noticed when you turn over a new leaf, when you manage to realign yourself with source, that your ego can push back and resist? That even though you've made a choice that serves your highest good, you find your brain questioning, well, what about this? What about, how come we didn't? And you find yourself faltering a little bit. You've gotten a new plan together. You're going to take, a clean slate, step forward, all of these good things, but then all of a sudden you find yourself stumbling a little bit. Now, this is the nature of our human brains, because our human brains love the comfort zone. So even the comfort zone of a bad habit, that's the comfort zone the brain is in. The brain knows what to expect. We're going to eat this much of this every day because that's what we like, and all of these kind of things. And you make a change, then you're going to your brain, your body is going to go, wait a minute, and thoughts are going to come up, like the other son. Thoughts are going to come up and question you and say you won't succeed, all these kinds of things. So please recognize that this is sort of a natural process. There's Jesus showing it. Back then he knew that was going to happen, and the father in the story, of course, assures him. So this is a way to remind you and assure you that when those thoughts come up, the doubts, the questioning, all of those things, that you can bless them. You can thank them for showing up and thank them for reminding you of how precious relationships are, reminding you how precious your health is, reminding you to be careful, whatever it is that those thoughts are there to, and then just bless them and let them go and realign yourself with source. So here's a quote about this from Bill Holton and his version of the Gospel of Luke. He says, we tend to camouflage our fear and deny the good that can come from an enlightened perspective. So our human brains can fight back against it, go, against our choice around, I'm going to align myself with spirit. Well, your brain might have a lot of questions about that. Oh, really? Is that true? Can you prove it? Those kinds of things. And that's just your brain. So this teaching of Jesus prepares us for this boomerang effect. It's reminding us that when we set out on a renewed course, there might be some pushback from our own brain, and that's okay. Don't worry about it. There's this old adage that says you can never go home again. Now, that's a very outer world adage, and it might be true in our human lives that, you can't go back to the house you grew up when when you were a kid, and it's not going to look the same because you're a grown up and things have changed. But in spirit, you are always home. You're always home. It's just that sometimes you forget. Sometimes you get distracted by stuff. Sometimes things happen in your life and you just have to get out there and take care of it. And then you can just, with one breath, with one shift of attention, you're back home again. Because in truth, you never left. You've always been there. So here's another quote from Bill Holton. It is essential to understand that we are indivisibilized expressions of spirit and have passport-free access to the kingdom of God. We have the ability to awaken from our sleep and realize we are spiritual beings in human form. And yes, I did say that word correctly as he writes it. Bill Holton does like to play with words. Indivisibilized. Indivisibilized expressions of spirit with passport-free access to the kingdom of God. Isn't that wonderful? So what I'd like to do now is move into a time of meditation. So I'd like you to take all that stuff we've been talking about, quiet the mind, open the heart space, and focus in your body right now on the breath moving in and out. And if you would, bring to mind an image of a door, an open door. And this is this door in your mind that lies in between your human nature and your divine nature. And it's always open. And as you observe this door, you realize that it's a freestanding door. There's actually not even a wall that it's attached to. So it's kind of a mirage. That door is always open. You could get around it. You can get through it anytime. It's kind of a figment of your imagination. So that anytime you step through the door, anytime you can engage with the truth of your being. It's possible for you to get engaged in your outer life and forget that you are spirit expressing at the point of view, but the only barrier here exists in your own mind. You are one with the one. You are wholeness in expression, no matter what the appearance is. So let's take this right now and move into the stillness for a few seconds together. And as we begin to come back to this moment, just focus on the breath, moving in and out of the body with ease. And let's reflect again. You are one with the one. You are wholeness in expression. You are home in spirit in every moment. No matter how things may appear, there is no separation, and you are welcome home at any time, no matter how prodigal you may have become in your thoughts and your activities. With one breath, with one thought, you can realign yourself with the truth of who and what you are. So let us close in gratitude. I like to put my hand right on my heart and let's say 3 times together, I am grateful. Are you ready? Let's say it. I am grateful. I am grateful. I am grateful. And so it is, my friends. That is it for me today, and I'm going to hand it back over to my friend Johnetta. Johnetta, you need to.
Yes, I
There you
need to
go.
unmute myself.
Yeah.
That was wonderful. Thank you for the reminder that home is always available to us. And thank you for watching the weekly broadcast from Unity of Fredericksburg. Visit our website, uofva.org, to learn more about our mission of spiritual awakening and transformation, and support our ministry with your financial donation. Thank you again for watching,